to reboost economy and all the legal measures that they are putting in place up there and we are putting in place down here to help in this business and economic recovery. Mathieu, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a pleasure talking to you. We are friends from the IBA, where we discuss a lot of cross-border transactions, and we're going to have the opportunity to talk about it today. So please, if you could give us a brief introduction on your experience. Thank you again.
Thank you, Kleber, and good morning to you. Good morning to everyone, to each participant to this webinar. It's a real pleasure. Unfortunately, we won't have a chance to see each other this year at the IBA, and this is how we have this idea to make this webinar. Fortunately, the IBA annual conference in Miami has been cancelled, so we have to use different tools for us to meet. It is true that I've been working for now 11 years in Doha, in Qatar, where I've been working for the same firm, and I am the head of the international department of the firm. The firm is called Al Suliti Law Firm. It was created by a Qatari lawyer called Mubarak Al Suliti, and it's now the largest law firm in Qatar, larger than the local law firms and also larger than the international law firms. So we are doing pretty well. Very happy with our success. We hope that we, will keep on growing. We are now expanding physically to different countries. We have an office in Egypt, in Cairo, and we just opened last November one office in Turkey, in Istanbul. So this is now the strategy of the law firm, is to expand, in the region, but physically, because we are working already with a lot of law firms across the globe, in Northern America, in South America, and in Europe, in Asia, in Russia, everywhere, in Africa and South Africa. But now we are really expanding abroad. So this is what I do. This is what we're doing. We are a local law firm, so we do both contentious and non-contentious business work. The reason I'm specifying this is that because international law firms in Qatar are restricted. They cannot handle litigations in front of local courts. So we can do it as a local law firm. So that's why we have two sections: one contentious section, one non-contentious, which is mine section, which also we also call the international departments.
Good. Thank you very much. We have put in place here a brief agenda. We'd love to hear from you. Our first question, that is, if there are new legal measures entering in force regarding infrastructure specifically in the first place, and in other relevant business sector, you consider it would be nice to share with us during the pandemic.
Okay, so yeah, I just want to point two new legal development that are potentially interesting for people following this webinar. Let me explain you how we do business, roughly how we do business in Qatar. When you come to Qatar as a foreign investor, actually it's true in Qatar and it's true in the Middle East, in the Gulf region. When you come to Qatar and you want to set up an LLC, for example, you are obliged to partner with a local entity or with an individual. That means that you need to give, as per the law, 51% of the capital of your LLC to a local entity or to a local citizen. That means that leaves only maximum 49% of the capital to the foreign investor. So that sounds like very restricted, but you need to put yourself in the shoes of a local businessman or in the shoes of Qatar. Qatar is a small country, very wealthy, small population. So the idea of the people locally initially said, okay, we need to, of course, let foreigners come in Qatar and make business, but at the same time, we cannot let people like basically steal from us. So we need to find some sort of a system that's kind of like a win-win situation. That was their win-win. That's their point of view. That was the win-win situation. But that was good in, I would say, 20 years ago already, like in beginning of 20,000. Now it's no longer really adapted. The world is changing. The world is changing very rapidly, and investors have said, listen, there are many other places where I can do business, in more favorable terms than in Qatar. So Qatar has to adapt, but has to adapt progressively, has to change those rules progressively. So it started by saying, okay, there will be areas where basically local investors international foreign investors can come and own 100% of the capital of the company. So that's true.
The free zones, right? There are the free zones, free zones.
The free zones are something else. I will discuss that later on. But still, in the LLC, you can set up an LLC and have a 100% of the capital of the company. It's true in agriculture, in a health system, in education, in the construction with restriction. Those are the areas where you could still come in Qatar and own 100% of the capital of the company. In last year, in January last year, the first law of the year last year was a law that even enlarged those areas where you can have 100% of the capital of the company. So basically now in the new law, you can own 100% of the capital in every sector. In every sector except the oil and gas sector, you can come and own 100% of the capital of the company. Okay? This law was passed last year, and we were still waiting for the decrees so that there was this law could come really in can be effective. And 1 week ago, and it's probably because of the pandemic, 1 week ago, more than a year after this law was passed, we finally saw the decree, and finally now this law has really entered into the legal bodies or of Qatar. So this law is really effective now, okay, enforced in Qatar. Now you mentioned free zones.
It is a very important innovation compared to your neighbors, right?
Yeah, it's.
I believe nowadays you are the more open country for investors in the region.
In the region, we are certainly the country which is the most attractive, which are the most attractive tools and organization structure for foreign investors. So this is a very important point to mention. You mentioned free zones. Qatar also developed free zones around the port and around the airport. So that's also basically very attractive. It's much more like for industries and logistic company working in the logistics. So basically, you don't need a partner. You don't need a local partner. You own 100% of your capital. You don't pay taxes, and you can get your money back, transfer your money very easily in your country without any restrictions. And they develop.
You don't even need the headquarters, right? You can just file it before your commercial registry without an address.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's just extremely flexible. And you have another entity that I need to mention because they do also a very interesting work. It's back in 2005. They created what they call Qatar Financial Center. It's not an offshore structure. It's an onshore structure, but with its own rules, own legal system, own jurisdictions. It was initially set up for banks, international law firms, and insurance companies. But also here they adapted themselves, and now it's you can basically set up at the QFC for any kind of business except import and export companies. You can basically set up at the QFC the same way. You have to pay taxes, which is 10% on the benefits, and you don't need any local partner. Um, that's basically, in a nutshell, what you need to know in Qatar about what the improvement in Qatar.
Nice. Very good. Very good. This is, I think it's disruptive because we are following the change in the regulation in the region for foreign investors. Last time I was in Dubai was in the Global Business Forum 2017, if I'm not wrong. They were boosting the free zones. However, the restrictions on onshore investments were in place, so you had to find a partner and then regulate your governance through a kind of side contract in order to keep the power of the company, despite the fact that the local person has 51% of the business. And this is, of course, something that threatens a little bit for investors. And if I'm not wrong, you are in a different place nowadays, and hope it's gonna open new opportunities for investments in Qatar. And this is something I think we could return back in our last question here. That is the opportunities we have together, Brazil and the region. And I'd like just to talk a little bit on what is going on here in terms of
Sure.
new regulation. We split it here in Brazil two scenarios, one specifically for the crisis, and we are passing some regulation on emergency status, both for private and public contracts and business, in order to avoid massive conflicts within the crisis period, which according to our regulation goes up to October. So from the beginning, the date is mid of March up to mid of October. There are new regulations entering in force in order to avoid massive conflicts and allowing contract rebalance, allowing the suspension of specific payments. And this is not exactly an intervention from the state, because it's not the state changing the contracts, but the parties having a kind of grace period in their obligations up to the predefined date. This is one scenario. And last week, the private emergency regulation entered in force, and probably this week or next week we're going to have the public contract emergency regulation entering force as well. And the other agenda is for the near future. We are trying to put in place new regulation on some specific sectors like sanitation. Here in Brazil, we have a big lack, huge lack of investment in sanitation. 100 million persons, they don't have access to treated sewage. And so if you see the situation all around the world regarding healthy and this virus and everything, we know that sanitation is a key point nowadays, and we expect having this new bill passed right away in order to attract private investment up to $100 billion. This is the number the government expects to reach in 2 or 3 years or 4 years of investment. We are having new regulation on energy sector, specifically involving privatization of public held companies or state held companies here. One is Eletrobras, one of the largest one. It's owned by our federal government, and they are planning to sell their shares, not just for an investment strategy perspective, but also to open some fiscal space for the state in order to have more money to assist people that nowadays are needing cash to survive. So as you know, here in Brazil, we have a big number of very poor people that need some help from the state. So, and our public debt is growing every day because of the expenses related to the pandemic. So we need fiscal space. And one strategy to open fiscal space is selling some assets. We have a new regulation on public real estate asset selling. Our federal government owns like 30,000 properties down here, and they are willing to sell the majority of those properties, also to raise some money to manage the situation better instead of issuing bonds and increasing the public debt. So this is another thing that is in the middle between the emergency and the near future, the selling of assets. And for mid and long term, there are some reforms following the last reform we had in our pension system last week. And we expect to have new reforms on our tax regime, which is very complicated, and the reform intends to simplify it. We expect having some reforms in our public employment systems. We have here in Brazil the public employees in a very, I would say, different position compared to the private employees, and we have to amend it in order to be more equal and reduce the state expenditure with the benefits that the public employees have. And so this is a very important agenda. We expect to see being accelerated in the next few months. And if we are able to fix these bugs, sanitation, tax, and what we call administrative reform regarding the public employees, we expect to start 2021 in a much better situation, because Brazil is a huge country, big population. We're talking about 220 million people. And if we are disciplined in terms of public expenditure, along with private investor oriented in terms of public policy, we expect to reboost the economy. Of course, not in a V, as people usually say, it's not exactly a V, but we are trying to be far away from an L that would put us in a very bad situation for a long time. So something in the middle would probably come if we are able to pass this reform. So this is the strategy we have nowadays, which I think is a good strategy, but with hard milestones in terms of political debate. Here in Brazil, we are polarized. And I think that we have some things in common with Qatar in terms of politics, not in internal politics, because we are very comfortable in terms of internal politics, but Qatar with your partners or your neighbors, we know that you have some things to deal with, and here in Brazil we have more internal concerns. So I think that I hope that the pandemic will help us to circumvent these disputes for the benefit of everybody. So this is what we hope, and we expect to put in place all these reforms. And so going to our second question here, and I told something about our state planning. I'd like to hear if there is, along with the change in regulation you just told us, if there is a kind of state planning involving infrastructure or other sectors, for example, agribusiness, to boost your economy in the near future.
So I would say there are three sectors that are like very important to consider here in Qatar. Of course, the oil and gas business is still, the number one industry in this country. Qatar, as you know, decided to leave OPEC. So Qatar is no longer under any restriction imposed by OPEC when it comes to oil and gas productions. And Qatar decided to increase actually the production of its gas production. So Qatar will considerably increase its production the next 5 years. So it is still an area where there is an industry where there is a lot to do, and Qatar is already looking at new joint ventures, new partners in those in the oil and gas sectors. So it is still something to consider. Uh, this is the first sector. The second sector is the infrastructure sector. Um, Qatar did a lot those past years, a lot to work on its roads system. But they also built a metro, a beautiful major metro system, which is now completed. But there will be expansion, so there will be new phases um, for the metro. Uh, so although the main part of the project is now complete, there will be other phases. The same for the airport. Qatar built, beautiful, amazing airport. Probably the most beautiful airport I've seen in this world, and there will be an expansion also in the next coming years. They already they already sent the tenders out and so on. So the expansion of the airport is another important point. Obviously, the World Cup projects, the stadiums, the roads, the metro, all of this is pretty much finished. And as you mentioned, the agribusiness. So for those who might not know, I mean, 3 years ago, um, our neighbors decided to impose a blockade on us. Not all of our neighbors, actually, I should say. The UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and a bit further west, Egypt. So we woke up and overnight there was a blockade imposed on Qatar, which was very not fair, illegal, whatever. But Qatar had to immediately look for a solution to feed its population, because Qatar was very much depending on import from Saudi Arabia, mainly from Saudi Arabia. Dairy products and meat and etc. etc. So Qatar decided to um, uh, look for other partners. Turkey was the main one, but also decided to have its own, to produce its own dairy products, its own meat and chicken and beef and whatever. So that requested that Qatar mobilize a lot of resources and infrastructures and look for new partners and new companies specializing in this area, which was brand new for Qatar. And as we don't see the situation improving overnight, and if it improves this year, it will never go back really like before. And Qatar will always be keen to keep some sort of independency from its neighbors. So I really hope that there will be an improvement. But again, Qatar will always be willing to stay independent. So there's still a lot to do in this sector. And as you know, um, uh, agriculture in Qatar is very challenging because of the climate. We need to tell you that it's just a big sand pit. So it's just like a desert, and nothing grows unless you come with a lot of water, a lot of fertilizers. But now in this business, and you know that better than me. I mean, I'm French, so I know that we have also in industry companies in France that are good at that. But now you have new techniques that do not require so many water, so much fertilizers, and not even sometimes doesn't even require a soil. So this is that kind of technologies that Qatar is looking for. So definitely, there's certainly. I know that Brazil is a big player, world player in this area. So this is definitely an area where there's certainly bridges to build between Qatar and Brazil. If you are in this field, you should definitely consider coming to Qatar because there's a big need.
Sure, sure. And I heard that US is pushing your neighbors to reopen
Hmm. That's
negotiations,
true.
right? Is that right?
That's true. I mean, we had a lot of hope December. Last December, there was a football competition in the area, and Qatar was the host. And Bahrain, UAE, and Saudi decided to, at the last minute, decided to send their teams to Qatar. And they also allowed their population, the supporters, to come to Qatar. So we were like, oh my gosh, we were like, it was big hope. We were said, oh, it's big, important moment. They are talking. Bahrain won the competition here in Qatar, and there was no issue with the national anthem. I mean, Qatari people are very respectful. They are the victims of this blockade, and they are extremely respectful. The Emir attended the final between Bahrain and maybe Saudi, I think. Um, so you know, no issue. There was absolutely no issue. We thought that it was doing good. It was like an important step. And then after that, nothing happened. And recently, it's true that it was confirmed also by the Qatari authorities. Yes, it looks that they have reinitiated the dialogue.
Good.
So we are hopeful. We're hopeful. We think that it will start by some sort of decision that uh, Qatari planes will be able to fly over Saudi Arabia again. Because right now, we
Yeah,
cannot
yeah.
fly over Saudi Arabia. We cannot fly over the UAE. We cannot fly over Bahrain. Bahrain had to kind of like compromise with this because we don't have a lot of choice. So we hope that the first step should be for the plane of Qatar Airways to fly again over Saudi Arabia. We hope that, but maybe it's going to be go further. We hope, but we hope that's going to be the first. Yeah.
Good. Returning back a little bit to the agribusiness, in Qatar, the land is owned by the state or is it private?
It's owned by the state. It's owned by the state, but you can be a private owner. I mean, Qatari people own their own land. They own their own houses and so on. But you can purchase. Yeah, you can purchase the land. There's no problem.
And do you know any initiatives from universities in terms of agribusiness technology to improve this strategy? And do you think that this is a field that we could explore? Because here in Brazil, we are worldwide known as a agribusiness technology exporter. We are probably we have the highest production level inside the farms. We have here a problem of logistics, but inside the farms, we have uh, extraordinary levels of production because of the technology we are developing in the last 50 years. We have a public state-held company called Embrapa that developed seeds and developed fertilizers and developed techniques in terms of plantation. And
Mm-hmm.
we have universities here working very hard to improve the productivity. And here in Brazil, we have all the kinds of weather. Not exactly a desert the way you have in the Middle East, but we have a lot of droughts all around the country
Mm-hmm.
and places with very low availability of water. And despite of that, we have important plantations there. So do you think that this field, I mean, research university would be something interesting,
Well,
specifically in
definitely,
agribusiness?
definitely because definitely, I don't think that there is any university really working on this, actively working on this. I think they just rely on foreign expertise. Um, Basically, I know they did some lab testing to try to have their own fish, try to have their own fish farms, if you want, and to have fishes and shrimps and so on. But I don't want to. I'm pretty sure that it is not really at the level where a university is really with experts and scholars and so on is really working hard on it in order to come up with new technologies and new techniques, etc. I think that they must be in here and there um, some uh, um, some departments, etc., but they mainly rely on foreign expertise. So that's definitely an area to explore.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. So going to our third question is that do you consider that local and or foreign investors are interested nowadays in infrastructure projects in Qatar, specifically because of this amendment in your regulation? Do you see as a law firm more initiatives or intentions to invest in Qatar coming from international investors?
Right now, for sure, after this new law was passed in the beginning of 2019, for sure, I receive a lot of phone calls and emails. People wanted to know, okay, so now basically I can come and have 100% of the capital of my company if I come to Qatar. And I say yes. I mean, that's basically what the law said. Well, we were waiting for the decree. Now the decree came out last week. Right now, in the middle of this pandemic, people are not, trying to save their situation. So I don't want to say that people are really jumping on this opportunity. Another a new thing that I forgot to mention is that also last week, so the week before, Qatar issued his public-private partnership law. So this is also a long-awaited. It was a long-awaited regulation that is finally out. So we'll see now. That is could be also interesting. We'll see what kind of project could be done through a PPP structure. That is definitely interesting. So
But you would say that this is more UK oriented or French German oriented, this PPP
uh,
regulation?
that's I would say more. It's more an Anglo-Saxon. It's more an English American
Yeah,
inspired
I see.
project. But I would say it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's a good sign. It's something that is known uh, in Europe, in the US, everywhere. But so uh,
Here in
in
Brazil, we have
Brazil, I guess
very
also.
important contracts.
So it works well wherever it's implemented. I mean, you need to have interesting projects out. You need to have solid partners, solid companies, and there are solid companies that are ready to embark in a PPP venture. So I'm sure they will have now. Qatar needs also to put some project out. I mean, I'm not going to lie. As I said, Qatar did a lot in the past years. Roads, metro, stadiums for the World Cup. Now we need to see what kind of project will be issued and could be realized with a PPP. One would be interesting is for those who know Doha. Doha is built around a bay, if you want. So you have like some sort of a semicircle, and they are trying to link both point of this semicircle by a bridge that could be above the water, but also a tunnel under the water. It could be an interesting
It's like
project.
the Eurostar, right? The
Something,
Eurotunnel.
so, yeah, exactly, something
Yeah.
like this. Some sort of a train, also train and road, like linking France and the UK. Could be here a similar project. It's going to be a beautiful project, huge project. It was voted in the budget of 2020. Um, Obviously, with this pandemic, nothing has moved that much, but it's still an ongoing project for Qatar. Could be the first PPP project. We'll see. We'll see if companies, consortiums, ventures are ready to organize themselves to come and take this project under a PPP structure.
Good.
It's going to be interesting.
And do you have large construction companies in Qatar, local
Yes, we do.
companies?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
do. We do have large, a very, very big.
And are they private
They
or
are they are privately
they
owned.
are
They are
private?
privately owned. Yeah, they
Private,
are
yeah.
privately owned. Yeah,
Good.
they are privately owned. Yeah.
Maybe a project that would be interesting to uh, design through PPP would be irrigation. Irrigation, because
Mm-hmm.
here in Brazil, we planned one at the federal level. for our northeast area, which is very, they need a lot of investments in terms of water supply, and not only because they don't have water availability, but this area is the poorest area of the country, so there is not a lot of space to charge tariffs from people. So you're gonna need an alternative, and PPP would be one of those alternatives, because the state could support a very important investments that would take water from a famous river we have here, which is called Rio São Francisco, the São Francisco River, throughout this area, this very, let's say, poor area that need a lot of water. So this is the project was designed here, and the problem was kind of federative issue, not a technical and even economic issue, because we have many states here in Brazil. We have the federal government and the states and the municipalities, and so the states were not in agreement on how to develop this project, and the federal government was waiting for a settlement among the states, but it never happened. And so the project is now waiting for a political understanding. And this is something probably we will not have in Qatar. And so irrigation is a very interesting project for PPP, I think. And this is a place where you can add a lot of technology as well. You have experiences, not, if I'm not wrong, not in PPP, but in technologies regarding irrigation in Israel. They are in the high end of this kind of technology. And we have here in Brazil some small projects testing technology in order to save water. So it's like you use a very small amount of water along with some fertilizers or other improvements in terms of plantation, and you have extraordinary outcomes. So this is something maybe Qatar could study, and here in Brazil, I think we have something to add to this kind of
definitely
initiatives.
Very interesting, yeah.
And talking something about Brazil in terms of foreign investments appetite, what we have here is in a specific field. As I said, sanitation. Here in our forum, we are being questioned by some foreign investors on this field, because if the regulation changes, it's going to be a kind of big road for investments. And sanitation is a very good business to design, because you have a huge capex, but you have a good credit risk, because you have a lot of people paying very small tariffs. So in terms of contract breach, if you have some people breaching, the other ones are paying, so you can rebalance it in terms of cash flow, and so the risks are quite low, and the regulation in terms of enforcing the contracts of water selling or sewage treatment is tested down here. So we have in Brazil is not an example of legal assurance, but legal security. But we can say that in this specific field, the regulation is tested. So it's an important area, and we are hearing from international investors some interest in this field. Other is the roads. Brazil has a huge plan of concessions for roads, and this is a big play and a good play for investors. And this is not being hit, I would say, by the pandemic, because the opportunities are so big and the lack of investment is so big that people see that right after pandemic, that we hope we're gonna reach the final, at least the control of the situation within the next few months. It's the moment, it's the time to assess the projects. Of course, not to invest today, but to invest in 6 months, I would say. So this is our reality here. And going to our last question, and we have thought something about it. opportunities of joint initiatives. I think that this agribusiness field is very interesting because Brazil can export. Brazil has many things to offer to Qatar. I think we don't have money to offer, but we have technology and we
No,
have
definitely.
expertise.
Yeah, and I guess you have also product to offer. I
Yes,
mean,
the products, we have the products as well, and this is very important. And I have a question: if you see Qatar exporting capital to other companies recently, and if you consider that analyzing the current situation, Qatar would be a capital exporter or not, if the government will keep the money inside the country.
no, Qatar definitely keeps on looking at opportunities to invest abroad. Okay, so that's extremely important. We talk a lot about London and in France, but Qatar is actually keen to invest everywhere as long as it feels like it's a good opportunity. So no, definitely they like real estate, but this is also highlighted sometimes by the media because real estate is something like very like visible for um, symbolic sometimes. Okay, they purchase that beautiful building in the Champs-Élysées. So yeah, of course, everybody. But they do not. They do other things. They are interested in other things. They also take participations in media companies in France, in the UK. Um, uh, they are sometimes looking at participation in energy companies. So this is less covered by the media because again, it's sometimes not that symbolic, not like wow,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
bought that
And
building.
it's more sophisticated. People don't understand it clearly.
Exactly, and it's a more sophisticated investment, as you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, so people don't really understand. So yeah, I mean, definitely, and I'm sure they would. Qatar would look at opportunities to invest more in Brazil. I'm sure they've done already, but I'm sure they would look at opportunities to invest more in Brazil. Uh, you know, uh, so that's if there is opportunity for sure. We
And
do
do you see that this you talked about investing in France, in UK? Probably you have a commercial treaty with these countries, and I'm not sure we have this with Brazil because we were negotiating here with the EU and Saudi Arabia a treaty, and there were some issues blocking the signature of this treaty, and because of that, there is a tax disincentive, a tax burden, which is not efficient, and then uh, sometimes I would say refrain the intention of investments from the region down here. Do you think that the options that Qatar use investing in France and UK is because of this treaty?
Well, definitely, we have that treaty, we have that agreement, so that's definitely appealing. That should be, but that should be something to consider for Qatar and Brazil. I mean, it's not at my level, but that's for sure definitely something to consider. But I don't think that if there's a good opportunity, I don't think that would be that's something that would um, block Qatar from acting. Okay, I mean, for sure, the financial or the tax conditions have to be good, but uh, if there is no such agreement in place before an investment comes out, I don't think that Qatar would be, blocked to act. That's so definitely
And
there's
and
something interesting to
and
do.
when you talk about these foreign investments, you're talking about the sovereign funds
Yeah,
or private initiatives as well. The
there
sovereign
are some
funds.
private initiatives, but definitely the sovereign fund is the big player here.
And then, do you have any information on distressed investment by the sovereign funds? For example, buying shares of companies in Chapter 11 or assets in distressed situation.
I
This
don't
is
have
something.
I don't have information like that. Um, what was let me think of the latest investment we made. I don't know. It doesn't.
Yeah,
Don't-
I'm
Okay.
questioning that because Brazil is a distressed situation country, since the last big economic crisis we had here started in 2014, which means that you have, I would say, two kinds of distressed deals on the table. One is where both the asset and the owner, the shareholder, are distressed, which is not any a play for a foreign investor, of course, because it's very complicated. But on the other hand, you have situations where the shareholder or the owner is distressed, but the asset is not. The asset is pretty good, and so it's an opportunity of purchasing at a very low price because the owner is in a bad financial situation. Most of the times, they ask for protection in our courts. We call here judicial recovery, which is similar to Chapter 11 in US, and the judge allows the selling of those assets with legal protection. So when you purchase, you don't take many liabilities coming from the last owner, which is, of course, not 100% protected, but the legal protection is quite good. And if you consider the exchange rate, the currency, and if I'm not wrong, probably you assess your opportunities matching with the dollar because of the oil. It's your main income. And here in Brazil, we have the reais, and the difference is 1 to 5. So you pay 20% of the nominal value of an asset. And so for an investor that is willing to expand, to export capital, for example, in the agribusiness field, we have here in Brazil many opportunities, distressed opportunities, not the asset itself. The asset is running accordingly. The problem is the owner that had a kind of capital structure issue because of our internal interest rates, or because the leverage in terms of debt and income was not very well planned. And so you have the opportunity to purchase it at a very low price. But this is not something that usually the sovereign funds do. One that is very well positioned here in Brazil is Mubadala. Mubadala has made one distressed deal here in the infrastructure, two, I would say, in the infrastructure sectors. And now they are assessing an agribusiness opportunity as well, which is distressed, very distressed. But I don't have information from Qatar, for example, if the sovereign fund is willing to assess distressed opportunities as well.
It depends. Again, it depends on the opportunities. I mean, so they are just open to any kind of opportunities. I just want to be honest with you. I know that a couple of years ago, they were kind of like sending the message to countries, stop sending us your rotten apples, because at the end, they were like feeling that they were approached by a lot of countries and companies that, oh, I have the distressed company that's not doing very well, but it has a huge potential. You should invest into that. So they kind of
They're selling PowerPoints. People selling PowerPoints to them.
Said, we are ready to invest, but give me something that where I can expect like a positive return, where not something where like there's a potential. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but for sure they would consider it. It's a major Brazilian company that is under some sort of a distress situation for the time being, because of this pandemic or for any other reasons. For sure, they will certainly consider it.
Good, very good. So, Mathieu, thank you again.
Thank you very much
for your availability. If you have to give us our final words, please feel free.
It was a good pleasure. It was a funny funny webinar between a small country and a huge country, but I'm sure we have a lot to do in common. So let's stay tuned and let's see what we can do. Yes,
hope so, and hope seeing you soon personally.
I hope
in a next conference, and hope these restrictions in terms of flighting through all your neighbors would be leaved, so we can use the Qatar Airways, which is a very pleased experience. And
It is. It is a
I'd
beautiful.
like,
It's a beautiful company. It is.
yes, yes. I'd love to visit you as soon as possible. Thank you again.
Sure. Same. Bye bye. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.
You too.